the left is going absolute nuts. And we always talk about how the courts, how the court should decide cases. Well, I want you to hear something. This is NBC. This is Chuck Todd. This is actually somebody who's legit, who is talking about how he believes the court should decide cases.
Tell us, how big of a deal is that when you have a sitting VP describing the court using those kind of words?
Look, it is, I think, a big deal. And when we think about the separation of powers, and I know that the Chief Justice cringes when that happens. But the fact of the matter is, when you ask yourself, what is the definition of activist court? Many people would say when a court makes rulings that go against where public opinion is. And in that sense, that is what happened. I mean, in the 50s and 60s, when the court was making decisions that the public wasn't supportive of yet, certainly was progressive at the time, but that was considered an activist court. In this case, it's a different way. We're sort of going into some would argue, in a different direction, but it's no less activism, if you will. So I understand the definition that she's come up with, but I do think it's only I do think the court as a political issue is now something that the Democrats believe is going to benefit them.
Wow. Now, I want you to just think about this. The court is an activist court, according to Chuck Todd, if it goes against what the majority of the people think they should do. Well, I thought the court was supposed to interpret the Constitution of the United States and was supposed to look at the Constitution and decide, well, is this contained in the Constitution? Is this something that it should be, is this a right, or is this something that is a political issue that should be decided by elected representatives? And the Supreme Court in the last term did something that was radical. What it did is it reduced power in Washington, D.C. It said this court is not going to make a determination of whether or not abortion should be legal in the United States. That is the purview of the states, and actually returned power back to the states. In another case dealing with guns, the New York Rifle and Pistol Association case, what the court do? They said, wait a second, the right to keep and bear arms is a right. It's not a second-class right. It is a right. And as such, and as an individual right, it means that you have a right not just to keep guns, but to bear them. And in doing so, told the state of New York that people have to be able to get concealed carry permits, and those permits have to be easily gotten. And so that's a real change, but it's not a power grab by the court. It is a reading of the Second Amendment and saying that's what it says, that's what it means, and so that's the way we're going to apply the law. And so that's where we're looking at. So when the left is attacking the court now as illegitimate, they're saying it's being delegitimized, it's illegitimate, or using the term delegitimized. And they're using cases like the two that we talked, the Dobbs decision, which overturned Roe v. Wade, and the New York Rifle and Pistol Association case, among others. West Virginia versus EPA is one of the other ones they refer to. When they say it's not legitimate, what that means is, very simply, they didn't do what we wanted, so we're going to pout, we're going to throw a temper tantrum, and we're going to call them names. And let's hope the Supreme Court doesn't listen to the little whiny, I was going to call them something, the left, doesn't listen to them. And this term, when they're taking on issues like whether or not race should be a determining factor in a primary determining factor in creating congressional districts, issues like that, when they're taking up those issues, they actually look at the law. They actually look at what the Constitution says, and they worry less about what the nattering nabobs, or the as Spiro Agnew would have called them, the people who are whining from the left or from the editorial pages of the New York Times and Washington Post and other discredited newspapers like that. Worry less about what those people think and more what does the law say? What does the Constitution say? What actually is what's in the Bill of Rights? How are the amendments? that they go at that perspective. And if they're going at that perspective, we can't complain about results. But the fact that people have been writing law from the bench for the past 50, 60, 70 years has kind of made the left kind of comfortable with the idea that they can get stuff done legislatively through the courts that they could never get done through the elected bodies. And what the court's saying is, we're not doing that. If you want to pass something, you've got to pass it through elected bodies. At least that was the case in the Dobbs decision. So with that, I'm going to get off. I just thought it's so amazing, and we're watching this attack from a number of different outlets attacking the Supreme Court's legitimacy. And oh, by the way, at the same time, we still have protests going on at the Supreme Court justices' homes, the GOP appointed Supreme Court justices' homes. Those justices are still having to go into their houses through back doors, through neighbors' yards, to try to get into their own house so they're not having to deal with an angry mob trying to come home from dinner. That's still happening right now. These justices, they don't live in ivory towers. They don't live in castles. They live in homes and neighborhoods just like yours and mine. Well, maybe a little better than mine, but they live in neighborhoods, and so this being exposed and being threatened by the left, and the Attorney General, the Biden administration's his Attorney General's refusal to enforce the law and stop these protests, which are designed to intimidate the legal process and are illegal under federal law. The fact that they won't stop these protests at these justices' homes tells you everything you want to know about the Biden media world, where they'll complain about justices deciding cases based on the Constitution, but they won't complain about the people. They won't enforce the law, where the people are being compelled to go through have intimidation in their very homes, at their very homes, to try to get them to come up with a decision that is based on political intimidation and not what the law says. We're going to return this country to the rule of law. We need a Supreme Court that's going to enforce the rule of law. And fortunately, this Supreme Court is doing just that. Takeaway on it: if you've got a senator who voted in favor of a Brett Kavanaugh or Gorsuch or Amy Coney Barrett, if you've got a senator who voted in favor of them, you need to let them know and thank them for putting honest, objective jurors on the Supreme Court. With that, this is Rick Manning, Americans for Limited Government, signing off.